Glad you're here and can be with us. There we go. Just making sure that I'm good here. So glad to see you so much. Some of you is probably concerned about Sue Layton, so let me go ahead and get that out of the way and tell you what I know. I understand now that it is a piece of tubing. It is a catheter of sorts that is in her heart. And my understanding is that this morning, yesterday we reported that it was the needle, but I'm feeling a little better about it now, as maybe you are as well, although still not good. They did try to do surgery this morning. They were unsuccessful in removing that from her heart, but she's in recovery now, and my understanding is she'll be okay with it there. So anyway, I talked to Amanda just before, or just as worship was starting, and so she was in surgery from about 8 or 8:30 this morning, and is in recovery now. So anyway, Jeremy's got something that he'll read in a little bit from that family as they sent their thank yous this morning, and I passed that on to Jeremy, but I wanted to let you know that. That's the latest information I have on Miss Sue, who is in St. Thomas in Nashville. I just enjoy so much going to polishing the pulpit because I get to hear so many lessons that are titled, geared, and directed right at where I am as a Christian, as a father, as a husband. And this morning's lesson was delivered by a guy by the name of Neil Pollard, who is a teacher in Colorado at Bear Valley. And he and his wife Kathy speak a lot and have done the marriage retreat, and he's done a lot with parenting and things like that, and husbands and wives, and his wife does a lot of speaking to ladies as well. He did a lesson at Polishing the Pulpit this year on what are we doing to push our teenagers away. And I really wanted this lesson to be in the package of lessons that I shared with you over the course of September, but I really didn't know where I wanted it to be. And so Marty contacted me a couple of weeks ago now and said, hey, can you speak youth night for us? And I said, I would be willing to do that. And so tonight I've got a lesson on what I think is the most challenging thing for our young people. I hope you'll be here tonight, especially you young people. I believe that I have, in my own mind, encapsulated what is your greatest challenge. And you might be surprised at what it is. So when that all came about, I thought, okay, here's my chance. This Sunday is all about young people, morning and night. Here's my spot. This is where I'm going to put it. And here's what I admit to you right out of the gate. I admit to you that I've never raised a teenager, number one. Neil Pollard has. He has two sons that are adult, college age now, and so he's done that. And so I'm presenting to you what he presented to me. I also recognize that many of you in here will never raise a teenager. Fair enough. Some of you raised teenagers decades ago. Fair enough. Some of you have teenagers right now. Some of you are grandparents of teenagers. Some of you are involved and interact with teenagers from time to time, be they kinfolk or not. For some of you, this lesson, it might not, and I'm just admitting that right out of the gate. But I hope and pray that somewhere, somehow, some way, you'll find application to it. If you were here Tuesday evening, you heard Kyle Butt say that in terms of Christianity as a whole, we're losing about 6 out of 10 young people. In terms of the Lord's church, we're losing about 4. They tell me that, and yes, this is a shameless plug, but you got to hear it anyway. They tell me that about 85% of young people that are actively involved in Lads to Leaders remain faithful to the Lord. You got a chance tonight. You got a chance to be involved. You got a chance to participate in a process of raising young people that has proven to be fairly successful. I'll admit to you right, clear and straightforward, that losing one teenager is terrible. Just one. But then to think about the numbers and the studies of young person after young person after young person that are becoming of adulthood age, be it college or 18 or whatever, moving out, finding independence of their own, no longer under mom and daddy's roof. The numbers are just staggering as to those groups of ages that are leaving the Lord's church. And the question is, why? And man, if we had all the answers, we'd be doing great, wouldn't we? If we had all the answers, I could be making millions if I had all the answers. Because we are, in fact, we're looking for answers. And I'm admitting to you that I don't have all the answers. But as Neil Pollard shared with me on that day back in August, he shared with me 6 things. I want to share with you 5 of those 6. And he began like this. We know what the Bible says. Jimmy read it a moment ago. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. Now, let me just be clear with you. I've raised kids long enough. My kids are old enough for me to say this by experience. You know how to make a kid happy? I figured out how to make a kid happy. You will never make a kid angry letting them do what they want to do. I just ain't seen it happen. I mean, you just let them do whatever they want to do, and you will never make them angry. And what's fun to watch about that, because sometimes it does happen, right? We let them do what they want to do. And sometimes they're even upset with themselves that they chose to do something that they really didn't want to do, right? It's kind of fun to watch. You know, even when they get all the freedom in the world, sometimes they admit, I wished I'd have chose this instead of that. What's my point? My point is that if you don't want to bring them to anger, then you just let them do anything and everything they want to do. The problem with that is that the Bible also instructs us to discipline and to instruct. Now, some of you young people are thinking, that's exactly right, Rodney. I've been trying to tell my parents all this time that you can't not make me angry and discipline and instruct me. You got to pick or choose. Either you discipline and instruct me and I get angry, or you don't do anything and then I won't be angry. But now, young people, here's the problem. Here's the problem. The God of heaven says in His Word that the two can go together. That there can be discipline and instruction and not anger. The God of heaven says that the two can happen together, that a child can be disciplined and taught and instructed and done so in such a way that anger is not the result. Colossians 3 and verse 21. Fathers, do not, NIV, embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Fathers, do not cause your children to develop bitterness and resentment, or else they'll become discouraged, to which children say, exactly. You just let me do what I want to do. I'll never be bitter. I'll never be discouraged. The problem we understand with that, well, let me just illustrate it biblically. 1 Samuel 3 and verse 13, what was said of Eli's sons? God said, I told them, I'll judge their family. I told Eli, I'll judge his family forever because of the sin that he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible, and he failed to restrain them. God says, I'll judge this family in such a way forever because of the evil and the wickedness of Eli's sons. And can I tell you why they were evil and wicked? Because he failed. Eli failed his sons. And that he did not restrain them. I do not believe for a moment that the Bible ever presents a pattern in which we just, if we don't want to turn children, if we don't want to push children away, we just turn them loose. I don't think the Bible presents that at all. I'm afraid that if I do this, I'll push them away, and so therefore I'll withhold instruction and teaching and discipline in order that I don't push my child away. There's no biblical example of that ever working. As a matter of fact, I would suggest to you that this is one where right the opposite happened. Because discipline and instruction and teaching was withheld, they actually ended up in a worse place than where they could have been. They actually ended up further away. So what is it that I might be doing to push teenagers away? And if you don't have teenagers, or if you've never had teenagers, maybe you don't have teenagers yet, maybe your teenagers are now my age and got teenagers close of their own, and you take this lesson and you think about, what did I do or not do? How did I or did I not? Or if your children are not teenagers, what can I or can I not do moving forward? Because I realize we can't rewind time. So how can I live today, whether you have teenagers or not? You are impacting the teenagers around you, be they grandchildren or nieces, nephews, be they young people at church who see you and know you. The first thing he suggested on that day was rules without reason. What rules are you following for no reason? I realize that a lot of eyes looking at me grew up in a generation different than I grew up in. And here's how it went in your generation. Son, I told you not to do that. Why? Because I told you so, and I am your father. And you didn't ask no more questions, right? That was it. That was the end of it. In other words, the only reason given was the fact that I am your father, and you didn't ask no more questions. I'm suggesting to you that we live in a different generation. And we live in a world of information, and we live in a world of technology, and we live in a world where young people today have every bit of information at their fingertips. Now, I'm not saying that it's better. I'm not saying that it's right. I'm simply saying that it's different. And here's what I'm telling you. Kids want to know why. And because I said so might just be the answer that's pushing them away. Now, I'm not denying the fact that because I, as your father, say so, ought to be reason enough. But I'm just simply saying that when they can type in any word in the English vocabulary and Google it in 0.00135 seconds and get 1.7 million answers, it's hard for them to look at you and say that the answer, because I said so, is sufficient. They want to know why. If there are going to be rules, and there's got to be rules. I'm not denying that there shouldn't be rules. I'm saying there ought to be rules. Absolutely. I mean, if we're going to follow Deuteronomy 6, and you know what the famous passage of Israel is probably, beginning in verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. These commandments I give to you today, that they be on your heart, that you impress them on your children, that you talk about them when you sit and when you walk, when you lie down, when you get up, that they be as signs on your hands and across your forehead, that they be on the doorpost out front, that these commandments, that these desires, that these rules, that these laws be always in front of them. And how important that is. But why? Why? What are the reasons? And I'm telling you that Mr. Pollard helped me to see that my children are looking for the reason. And it might just be that if I can accurately explain the reason to them, they will be more obedient to the rule. Number 2, commands without consistency. It's hard being fair as a parent, isn't it? I guess if you've only got one kid, maybe it's easy, you know, because you just do whatever you do with that one kid. But if you got more than one kid, I don't know. Maybe you did it perfectly, but I haven't. I haven't always been fair between children. And what I'm admitting to you is that inconsistency is easy to spot. And children spot it very well. And so if you're going to make a command, let me just ask you, how would you like to live in a land where the laws changed constantly? I guess the biggest complaint I've heard about Lawrence County, Tennessee, since I have lived here, is how many times the speed limit changes on Highway 43 between the state line and the county line. And somebody tells me it's about 17. I don't know. But you know why that's so frustrating? Because you don't ever know what the law is, right? You're here and you're there and you're there and you're there. And I get it, I understand it, but I know nowhere else like it. I don't know of another place where the school zone is 15 miles an hour. You can't even ride the brakes at 15 miles an hour. I mean, come on now, if we're going to be consistent, let's be consistent. You go to other places and it's 35. I understand why it's there. I understand the reason. I'm not opposed to the reason or the rule. I'm just simply saying that when 3 and 4 cars end up in our church parking lot with another car sitting behind it that's black and brown and got some lights on top of it, I'm going, well, yeah, okay, they're not used to driving through a 15, it's not consistent. I understand it's marked, I understand the lights are flashing, I understand it's the law. I'm not denying any of that. I'm just simply saying that it's inconsistent. Because everywhere else you go, it's 35. It's 10 miles an hour below or 15. It's not a third of the speed limit. Where out here it is. It's a third of what's the normal speed limit. And all I'm simply saying is that when there's not consistency, you and I get upset. And then we're going to look at our teenagers and go, well, y'all just going to have to deal with it, right? No, we don't deal with it very well, and neither will they. I'm not against commands. Don't misunderstand me. Commands are important. There has to be commands. There has to be responsibilities placed on young people. We just got to be consistent with it. And then take that a step further, and when you don't adhere to the commands, then the repercussions have got to be consistent. I love what the Bible says in Hebrews 13 and verse 8. You want to know about Jesus? Let me tell you about Jesus. He never changes. He's always consistent. In other words, how would you feel if you get to Judgment Day and God says, well, you know, I realize that we did it this way for a while, but today we're going to do it different. And I'm sorry, you failed. Well, wait, what? Huh? You didn't tell me you were changing the rule. Well, I know, but I'm God and I can do whatever I want to do. Well, you can't argue with that, neither can I. But do you feel like you were treated very fairly? Do you feel like that was very just? If he's constantly changing the rules or the desires. Now, how do you think these teenagers feel? When one day it's okay and the next day it ain't. When you and I as parents, is it okay to have situational? No, it is not okay to have situational ethics. But then when it comes to dealing with our children, let's consider the situation. My friends, that's situational ethics. And it's inconsistent because it's based on whatever the situation is. And let me tell you something, the situation changes every time. So if that's where your ethics are, and that's where your parenting regulations are, then it changes every time. Now, I'm not suggesting that we don't do things differently based on, but the ethics behind it always stays the same. This is why we don't do that in this particular situation, and that will never change. Though the position and the place and the people and whatever else may change, we don't do this for this reason. And that reason will always stay the same. And this is why, and we're going to be consistent. And then when your younger sibling comes along and they're a teenager, guess what? That older one's going, let's just see if mom and daddy's going to be consistent. It may just be that commands without consistency is what's pushing away our teenagers. Number 3, it may be expectations without example. I love what Jesus said about the Pharisees. He said of the scribes and the Pharisees that they sit on Moses' seat, Matthew 23. And he says they do so to observe, and you observe whatever they tell you, but don't do what they do. Why? Because Matthew 23 and verse 3, they preach, but they don't practice. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I know of nothing that children can spot easier than hypocrisy. They know a hypocrite when they see a hypocrite. And if it's the case that I, as their parent, are the hypocrite, then no wonder they're being pushed away. If Daddy's expecting things of them that he's not holding himself accountable to, if Daddy's expecting things of them that he's not living the example before them as to how to achieve the expectation, then no wonder. You can tell them all you want to. You do as I say, not as I do, and they are going to, without fail, do as you do. Because that's what they're watching. That's what they're seeing. And so if we're going to set the expectation, then we've got to live the example of the expectation that we have. And perhaps that one is the most critical in my mind of all of these 5. But I've got 2 more. Number 4 is discipline without discretion. Discipline without discretion. We've got to understand that discipline involves not only discretion, but according to this pie graph, this image I found online somewhere, also communication. And there is no discipline without discretion. There is no discipline without communication. And one of the reasons why I think we're struggling so harsh in our country today with child abuse is because we got a lot of child abuse going on. And you stay with me so that you don't misunderstand me. My fear is we've got some child abuse going on in Christian homes. Because what we've got is discipline. We've got discipline. And buddy, my God tells me to discipline them little boogers. But it has no discretion, it has no communication, and it has no love. And my friends, when discipline is not cooperating with those other things, it is child abuse. It's not discipline. It's not what God defined as discipline in the Bible. Discipline involves discretion. There's not a person in this building that wants one of the elders to come up here right now at this microphone and call your name out publicly and tell the whole congregation what you're doing wrong. Not a person in this building that wants that. But yet, if I'm not careful, I'll call my children out in one of the biggest groups, in one of the loudest ways, and I'll just emphasize what they're doing wrong for the whole crowd to see. And I do so under the banner that public humiliation will cause them to behave better. It might just be what pushes them away. It might just be what causes them to say, when they get the opportunity to say, I will no longer be around you, I am no longer around you. There has to be discretion. If they're doing something wrong, they have to be disciplined. I am not advocating we stop discipline. What I think Mr. Pollard is saying is we've got to, as parents, know our children, know what we don't like public humiliation. Why would they? We don't like public shame. Why would they? And we've got to figure out how to communicate with this child. We've got to figure out how to communicate with this teenager. We've got to figure out how to do it with discernment. Ultimately, all motivated by love. Right? 1 Corinthians 13, it's all done by love. It's all done out of love. It's all done. My daddy used to say, son, I do this because I love you. It's love. It really is. Love. And it's you and I working hard to discern. We see a child doing something wrong. It may not even be our child. We see a teenager behaving ungodly. It may not even be our teenager. You've got to use discretion in how you address that situation. Because how you address it might just impact their soul for eternity. Number 5, a home without heart. We've gone from the front porch to the iPhone, as Neil Pollard would say. We've moved into the information world, the technology age. We've gone from a time when we used to sit around and talk to a time when we sit around and text, as Neil Pollard would say. We do it at home. We do it at the restaurant. We do it in the grocery store. We do it in the car. He said we have replaced stuff with time, or we have replaced, rather, time and relationships with stuff. Now you think about that. We have replaced time and relationships with stuff. And so we got kids growing up in a home that there's just not a lot of heart. There's not a lot of connection. There's not a lot of relationship. There's not a lot of sharing. There's not a lot of intertwining. There's not a lot of character building. There's not a lot of spiritual building. There's not a lot of, you just keep on and on and on down the list. Because the time's not spent, the relationships are not what they ought to be, and according to Mr. Pollard, we've exchanged it for stuff. Isn't it the goal this morning? Correct me if I'm wrong. But isn't it the goal this morning that according to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 10, up in the top left-hand corner, the Bible says, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Isn't it the case this morning that everything we do is striving to get us ready for that moment, and that moment only? When we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ to receive the things done in the body according to what we have done, whether they are good or whether they are bad. God is going to judge all. Shouldn't it be our greatest priority that everything we do is an effort to get ourselves ready to stand before the judgment seat of Christ? Should it not be this morning that everything we do for our children and our teenagers is to get them ready to stand before the judgment seat of Christ? And so anything I'm doing to push them away, God forbid. And help me to figure it out and to get it right, to get it changed, to get it adjusted, to get it modified. Because if I'm not careful, it might just be too late. It might have just went on too long. It might be that the course is taken and the only thing that can change the course is some divine intervention from God. And oh, that I would be praying for that daily. What can I do to keep from pushing my children away? What can you do to keep from pushing my children away when they become teenagers? I hope that's important to you. I hope it matters. Because they, as teenagers, are becoming accountable souls. I'm not going to give you an age. I'm just saying that somewhere in those teenage years, they're becoming accountable souls to the Lord. And everything we do should be getting them ready to stand before God on their own. And don't ever lose sight of the fact that how I live impacts them. And so I'm asking you this morning, are you helping young people get to heaven? Are you? Whether you've got them or not, are you helping young people get to heaven by the way you live? If you've got them, are you helping yours get to heaven by the way you live? If not, I'm begging you to come as together we stand and sing.